once again to EWTN's Bookmark. I'm Doug Keck, your host. Our guest author, joining us from St. Louis, is Chuck Neff. The book, The Deal, published by Matter Media, available through the EWTN Religious Catalog, EWTNRC.com. Welcome, Chuck Neff, to EWTN's Bookmark.
Doug Keck, thanks for inviting me. Good to be with you today.
It's always great to see you, Chuck. I've known you for a number of years. We met when the Holy Father was coming to St. Louis. I had seen you years before. I didn't realize until I met you that you were the guy from Marriage Encounter videotapes that had been done years before when I was involved with the Marriage Encounter. And so it kind of makes somewhat sense that you would write a book, The Deal, which kind of deals with issues in marriage.
Well, it's everything I've ever wanted to say about marriage. Certainly our involvement, my wife Judy and I, our involvement in Marriage Encounter. We were involved in Retrovi, which is a weekend for hurting marriages, and certainly all of the insights that we've been able to gain over the years of living out our marriage and doing all of that. So it all kind of came together in the book, right. And it's everything I've ever wanted to say just about marriage and the importance of the sacrament of matrimony. Couples just need to know that.
And one of the things that I really thought was great about the book and reading it is how overtly Catholic you wanted it to be. It wasn't one of these euphemistic things. You have a Catholic priest in there. They're talking about the sacraments. They're talking about confession. I'm assuming that was a deliberate part of your writing this book.
Absolutely. I wanted it to be Catholic, very Catholic, and I think the reality is if you talk to the marketing people, they say, well, you know, if it's Catholic, a lot of people may not want to read this. Well, too bad. I just wanted this to be a Catholic book about Catholic couples, Catholic priests, and the importance of living out our vows, the promises we make to one another on our wedding day. And I wanted to write a book that would hopefully inspire couples, motivate them, help them know they're not alone, going through everything they're going through, and we all go through it. There's no doubt about that. And so, yeah, I wanted it to be Catholic, and I think it's quite Catholic.
Right, and you even take on some tough issues like contraception you talk about in the book as well. Now, the book is fiction, but I'm assuming it has heavy undertones of reality, not only your experience, but even the fellow here, Charlie. Now, is your real name Charles?
My real name is Charles.
Okay.
Yes. Yeah.
So, but Charlie isn't you, is he, or is he sort of you?
Well, there's a lot of me in Charlie, but there's a lot of the people we've met along the way in Charlie as well, and everything he's going through. And you know, Doug, we've talked to couples, and we've talked to people who've been married for a long time, and just going through everything they're going through. And so a lot of the book, a lot of the story is based upon my personal experiences, but certainly the insights and conversations I've had with couples and that I've had with priests as well.
Right. It's interesting you say, my name is Charlie and I'm a jerk. And I thought, and he said, if you talk to people who know me best, and if they're honest, that's the word they might be throwing around. So it's an interesting way to, not exactly a part of the self-esteem movement here in this particular book and starting things off, but you could really fill in the blank, I think, in reading this book in a lot of ways. I thought is that each one of us in many ways could insert our name to each time that you see Charlie's name.
Well, we're all very much alike. There's no doubt about that. And so for us to be able to put our name in there, a lot of us are going through the same things. And I think, Doug, and certainly in terms of marriage, and you know as well as I do, that so many of us go through life as a husband or as a couple thinking we're the only ones going through this, and it's just not true. We're all going through it, but we don't think we should be going through it. So you know what? We don't want anybody to know that. And so we walk around lonely. We walk around in the dark. We don't really know what to do with it. And so it was really just a matter for me of being able to make it relate to all people.
Right. You also point out, in a sense, the story of this gentleman who you show that juxtaposition where my business is great, the money's flowing in, but I'm not happy. And quickly you get to the point of what is that unhappiness, and it's really problems in his marriage, right?
Well, that's what starts to happen is the marriage starts to head south, and then all of a sudden we're looking for our happiness in other things.
Mm,
And so then that's when the world sneaks into our relationship, and money and power and everything else the world tells us we need or that we should have start to take over. And then the marriage, that relationship starts to slide down the priority list a little bit, and then the disillusionment, the pits, what I like to call the pretty intolerable terrible situations start to come into our life, and we don't know what to do with it. So what we end up doing in so many cases is we run. We
right,
run away from
right.
everything.
Well, isn't that the predominant culture's encouragement these days? I mean, you go back 50 years ago, there was probably a little more of a cultural understanding of saying you need to ride through these things. This is the way life is. Work through it. But in our culture today, it's kind of like if it doesn't feel good, get out.
Yeah, exactly. One of the lines I use in the book, when we talk about our marriage vows and the days that day, our wedding day, when we make those promises to one another, and we say basically forever, and it's forever. It's not 12 or 13 or 14 or 15 or 16 years, whichever comes first. It's a commitment for the rest of our lives to love and honor one another for as long as we live. So yeah, it's important that we understand that and live it and recognize we're not alone and we have to fight. We can't quit on this relationship.
Right. You also make a couple of points that I could say jump out at me from a marriage encounter perspective. You talk about the fact in his marriage, he said about how his deal that he's got coming up should be jubilation. It's anything but. Nora, his wife, is the center of my attention, and it's not a good attention. All of her endearing qualities don't seem quite so endearing right now, which is certainly something I think in the marriage encounter concept of reviewing life. Also, life right now is as bleak as anything I've ever experienced. The loneliness is suffocating. We live in the same house, but we might as well be living miles apart. Those two things about the shine wears off. People start getting turned from having a relationship as spouses into, in a sense, a mom and a dad who then take on different functions, right?
Well, that's exactly right. And so, I mean, the priority, I mean, we have to be a husband and wife first. Then we're parents. But what happens is suddenly everything gets in the way, and now our being a parent is the bigger priority. And so, schedules for kids and soccer games and baseball games and everything else that's going on in our life, all of a sudden that becomes the focus. And we, as the couple, we tend to get pushed down that priority list. We begin to tend to get pushed aside, and everything else, all the things in our life, all the other people in our life, they become more important. We become less important. And again, I'm just trying to tell married couples, man, you got to fight. You got to just work on making you who you want to be and live out those promises you made on day number one of your marriage.
Right. And you talk about here, Charlie and Nora had each other, and that was really all that mattered. Kind of thinking back about those times now seem to be swallowed up in the history of a couple who thought they could change the world. Why does it seem that so many times, and you're kind of reflecting in this story, that when people talk about the good times, they're not talking about the time they made a lot of money or even when they got the beach houses. They talk about the early days when they were just starting out.
Oh yeah, I mean, I was thinking the other day about some of the first cars we had, which back then, a few years ago, were not the latest model. It was what we needed to do, and we were living in an apartment, trying to figure out if we should get cable or not. and and so it's those times when we're kind of working on our marriage together, making decisions together, financial decisions, just where we're going to live, all of those other things that when you go back and look at it, that's when we were together. That's when we were really working on our marriage and working with one another through all of the good stuff and the tough stuff.
Right, because you need each other to survive and to move forward. It's when things start to get a little more accommodated in our lives that we start to think, like we do with God many times, well, I really don't need him that much. I'm kind of doing my own thing here. And you talk about how he goes on this trip, decides he's coming back, he's not going to face his wife, So he goes on a trip and he ends up going to visit his grandmother, who makes the point right off that she prays for them all the time as a couple.
Well, yeah, and the grandmother was probably a compilation of my grandmother, who lived in Scotts Bluff, and just a gentle woman, loving, challenging, but very matter of fact, very honest, very direct. And so she gets into it and kind of challenges him and nudges him and says, what you're here to do to kind of get away and figure this out. I'm really not here as your grandmother to let you do that over these next couple of days.
Right, she really wants to challenge him. Also, he runs into an old high school friend who was the last guy I think would be a priest, Father Bill Donahue. Who did you base him on?
Uh, Probably just a compilation of all of the priests that I've had the opportunity to meet over the years and get to know over the years. So I don't know that there was any one specific priest. I can tell you that some of the stories of Father Bill are based upon conversations I've had with other priests who, by the way, gave me permission to share the stories through his eyes, but it was their own stories. So yeah, it was probably just a compilation of all the priests that I've had the really great honor to know and meet over the years.
Well, one of the points you make when they first get to meet each other again, Father Bill talks about, I've discovered that it's in the silence I can really hear God. And I think that's something we lose so much today in the society we live in. And of course, Charlie hears it differently. He says, well, I don't really hear anything at all.
Well, and I think I know I was reading the diary of Saint Faustina a good number of years ago, and I'm one of these readers, Doug, that something touches me, and then I'll sit with it for sometimes months. And so I was reading the diary, and Saint Faustina said that I spoke to Jesus in profound silence, and I thought, what? And so that has always just touched me. But I've also had the opportunity to really be in those silent moments where if you're silent, if you are still, if you will take the time, you can hear God. I've had those experiences. I'm sure you have as well. I'm sure people watching today have had those experiences as well. And so silence is really powerful. And so I kind of wanted to get that idea in.
Right. Well, I think what's interesting too, I think in relation to getting people to go on the weekends is, one of the things is that, and you make the point in the book, the idea that you need to change ultimately. If you want things to get better or the way they were, you need to change. You're not going to change other people. You need to change yourself and how you react to the situation. And the reality is most of us don't want to change. And so in a lot of cases, a lot of people aren't interested in listening to what God has to say, because it might mean they need to do something they don't want to do. And in the noisy world we live in, we run away like he does, as you point out.
Well, and I like to say that change is wonderful as long as somebody else is doing it. if we're being challenged to change ourselves, I'm not so sure I want to get involved in that. But change is wonderful, and again, in everybody else, not so much in me, but that's really the key. If we want a situation to change, if we want a marriage to change, we can't look at our wife, in my case, and expect or want her to change. I have to change. That's
right. Another point you make in the book as well that's really important in a couple situation is the whole idea of forgiveness, right?
Well, the power of forgiveness. I like to say that the four most important words that a couple will ever say to one another are, "Will you forgive me?" That requires a yes or no answer. And I'm sorry is good. Let's be sorry. Let's be sorry for the crazy stuff we do and when things don't go right. Yes, be sorry. But will you forgive me requires a yes or no answer. And I tell the story. Years ago, Judy and I were having some, horrific fight about something. And she came to me and she said, "Will you forgive?" And I said, "You know what? Just not so sure I can." She reached up and she grabbed me by the collar, and we were in the kitchen. She pushed me back into a kitchen chair, sat on my lap, and pointed her finger in my face and said, "You have to forgive me because God says so." And so it was one of those moments where, yes, God is calling us to forgive one another, and we really have to do that. It helps us grow, and it really, there's power in forgiveness. And the other thing that I like to talk about, people, and let's be real clear, I'm not a theologian, so this is a lot of on-the-job training, so to speak. But we talk about forgive and forget. I mean, my experience of that is we really don't forget. I mean, I remember that incident, so I have not forgotten that. But what happens in true forgiveness is the pain, the wound. That's what goes away. So I remember what happened, but I do not remember the wound. I do not remember the pain. I do not remember what we were fighting about. And so in real forgiveness, it just goes away, and it's really powerful.
And I think that's important because so much in the world today is well, I say I'm sorry because if somehow what I did sort of offended you, well, then I'm sorry I did that, which is a way of apologizing without apologizing.
Right. I'm sorry, and deal with it. This is just the way we're going to be. But we've got to forgive one another. God forgives us. Right. We need to be that reflection of God in our relationship as well.
Right, and likewise, He expects us to change as part of that forgiveness you're being granted. You also have this same with you. You have the grandmother, and you have this shrine cabin. Where'd you come up with the concept of the shrine cabin and the journal from the grandfather?
Well, I'd had the idea for a long time, and so that was all part of this story, this kernel of an idea that I had in terms of the entire story. And I don't want to probably give too much away here, but I knew that I needed to get the grandfather away from everything. He needed to get isolated, and so I basically created a little cabin out in the back of their property where he went to reflect and pray and do what he did. So it was just part of the story idea that I had, and it just kind of came to fruition as I wrote the story.
Right, and there's some surprises, some interesting things that happen in relation to that people have to read the book. The priest makes the point, and he says, "Look, Charlie, life gets complicated. Every relationship goes through ups and downs. It's a roller coaster at times, huge highs and low lows. It's then a question of what are you going to do when life gets difficult and heads in a direction you hadn't planned on."
Well, and life will go in directions that we haven't planned on. I mean, that's just the reality of living our life as a married couple, really just living our life. And so really it's a matter of what we're going to do with it when things don't go our way. But then that takes me, Doug, right back to our wedding day and the vows we made, the promises that we made to one another on that wedding day. And I always like to also point out that, we marry each other every day of our life. So day number one was our wedding day, but day number two, wherever that was, we're saying yes again to one another. We're saying I do to honor and love each other for the rest of our lives. And day number 3 and day number 10 and day number 100 and day number 1,000. And I like to go back and remind myself. And so I can tell you today as we're talking, I went and checked on this. For my wife Judy and me, this is day number 19,248 in our marriage. Now, I can tell you there have been some days when we have really lived out our marriage vows very, very well. And there's other days when we're not doing so well with all of that. And so it's a matter of saying yes in the good times, the bad times, the tough times, all the days of our life. And it's not just not on our wedding day. It continues. And so I just wanted to kind of make the point that bad stuff's going to happen. And then it's going to be a matter of what we're going to do. Are we going to love one another through all of those tough times or not?
Now, one of the points you also make in the book, and it's a very Catholic point, but you're talking about the whole idea of suffering. and that when you have to look at Jesus on the cross. That's why Catholics have crucifixes in their churches to remind them, and people need to acknowledge that in a marriage or in any relationship, there's always going to be not only suffering but sacrifice, which is the big part. But in the world we live in today, that's not really a particularly honored feature or virtue.
Well, no. If it hurts, let's
Right,
run
right.
away from it. Let's don't do that. But in a sacramental marriage, the sacrifice that we make as a husband and wife, it's critical. And sometimes it's just a matter of letting my wife have the last piece of cake. Sometimes it's something as simple as that, but other times it's a matter of deciding to sacrifice what's going to get done today at work to come home on time. Sometimes it's a matter of sacrificing for our wife, in my case, but for our family,
Right.
to doing things for them and not so much for me. So sacrifice is critical. Jesus hanging on the cross, that's our model.
Right. It's interesting, too. The other point you make out here, and that was a point certainly I got from the whole marriage encounter experience without promoting it, which I'm happy to promote it, is you really understand that marriage takes three, kind of like the old Fulton Sheen thing, and you really have to realize that you have to put God at the center of your marriage, and that's the secret to the success.
Well, and yeah, I mean, if God's not in our marriage, it's just not going to work. And so we may think it'll work, and yeah, okay, maybe it works a little bit. But if we don't have God in the center of our marriage, if He is not part of who we are as a married couple, if we don't pray together, and we do pray together, if we don't forgive one another as God forgives us, if we're not doing that and God's not part of it, it just it heads downhill. It's not life-giving. God, I think, just gives us the ability to put life in the tough times and the bad times, put life into who we are as a married couple.
Well, let me ask you, in the beginning, where you honor your wife Judy in the beginning, thanks God for permitting you to walk through life with her, and you say the book's dedicated for married couples everywhere, and then you say the world needs you to be a great couple. Why? Why does the world need married couples, and why do they need to be great couples?
The world needs married couples to be great couples because in the sacrament of matrimony, we are the reflection of God's love to the world. I had a friend years ago say he saw a couple walking down the street, and they were walking hand in hand and just walking together kind of in step. And he realized when he saw them walking together, that's how God walks with us. So we as a married couple, we have a great responsibility to live out our sacrament, to live out our marriage through all the ups, through all of the downs, so the world will know how they love one another. Gosh, that's how God loves me. So it's a great responsibility as a married couple to be that witness to the world of how God loves us.
Right. Let me ask you also, because you talk about a little bit about writing the book and wanting to write the book, and Sister Lucia and Fatima had an impact on your decision to write the book. How so?
Well, first of all, I'm a convert, so love the Catholic Church. I'll tell you, when I grew up, my mom, God rest her soul, she said to me just one time, she said, "Now look, I'm going to love anybody you marry, but don't you marry a Catholic." Well, I did. So ended up marrying this really cute girl. She's the light of my life, and the getting and walking deeper into my Catholic faith and the rosary, everything, Mary, all of that, and really started to develop a devotion to Fatima. And when I started reading more about that, the visionaries at Fatima, she told them, pray the rosary every day for world peace. I mean, that motivated me. I say a rosary every day. But two of the children died fairly young, but sister, now a religious sister, Lucia, in one of her last interviews in her 90s, she said the final battle between Jesus and Satan is going to be over marriage and the family. And look at what's going on in the world today. And so reading that really, because with this idea that I had for a long, long time, that was kind of the the springboard, so to speak, to be able to say, okay, write it. If it's good, it's good. If it's not good, well, at least you wrote it, and there you go. But so Sister Lucia's words that this final battle between Satan and Jesus is going to be over marriage and the family really, really motivated me to at least try to do it.
Right. Speaking of marriage and the family, you're working on a project for us, I believe, as we speak, right? Want to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, it's called The Promise. We Said I Do Forever. We actually, Doug, as you know, produced 5 programs about 2 or 3 years ago. And thank you, by the way, for contracting with us to produce 5 more. So we are in the process, as we speak today, we are in the process of videotaping the first 2 couples this week. We'll do the other 3 couples in another couple of weeks. And so the plan, and we'll see how this goes, is to produce these, edit them, and then I don't know what your programming schedule is, but I had heard sometime in the fall to get all 10 programs on EWTN. But you know, it's back to Marriage Encounter. I mean, the power of Marriage Encounter is when we hear, and hopefully this book, is that when we hear the stories of other couples, we know we're not alone. And so The Promise, we said I do forever.com, this 5-part series, 10-part series on EWTN this fall, is really just telling the stories of other couples so that other couples watching will know they're not alone. If they can do it, gosh, I can do it. And so that's really what's behind the story. Thank you so much for permitting us to do it.
Oh, it's our privilege. And absolutely, Mother's vision was for Catholics to know they're not alone. That's why they can listen to the radio. That's why they can see us on the web and the network as well. Thank you so much, Chuck Neff, for all the great work you do. And we look forward to that series. Of course, the book, The Deal, published by Matter Media, available through the EWTN Religious Catalog. EWTNRC.com. You can pick it out, all things Catholic. Look for the entire interview coming soon on the network, of course, and look for Chuck's work as well. We'll see you next time right here on EWTN's Bookmark. Thanks.